a podcast for dads who love music, made by dads who love music. And now your hosts, Josh and Joe.
Hello, and welcome to Dad Rocks, the podcast about being a dad and loving music and how the two intersect in our lives. I'm Josh, and I'm here with my co-host, Joe.
What's up, Josh?
And our producer, Steve.
Hey, guys.
So the release of this episode marks the 1-year anniversary, more or less, of the start of this podcast. To mark this important milestone, we have an incredible guest on the show, former Black Crowes drummer Steve Gorman. But before we get to that, we thought we'd take some time to reflect on the past year of doing this show and where we hope to go with it. So guys, it's, been an absolute pleasure and kind of like a crazy year of doing this. And, I mean, I know that I think we're all pretty happy that we did this, right? It's
Oh, yes. Like you said, a hell of a year. I mean, for many reasons. When we started it, I was in another house. I wasn't even a homeowner yet at that point. It was pretty crazy. I was in the middle of trying to close on my house, in between jobs, start of COVID. All of us had a lot going on, but that's where I was during that time. So, Josh, when you really spearheaded this, thanks again for bringing me in. And it's been, definitely one of the highlights of the last year.
Hands down.
Yeah. And we've been talking about doing it for at least a year or two. I mean, definitely since my son was born. So it's got to be, because my son turned 2 in the summer. So it's probably about a year.
Mm-hmm.
And we just never had time. Life gets in the way. And with the pandemic, like I said on the first episode, it kind of allowed us to finally try this out and see where it was going. I think for me, I had much more high aspirations and anticipation that we would definitely be doing this more often. But that was because when I had helped out a friend's podcast way back when, they pretty much recorded 2 episodes a night whenever they did it, and just no editing, no nothing. And then, bringing Steven, who's a professional, it definitely changed things up because, we have I think we have a really nice sounding podcast. We do a lot of editing, which is a lot more time consuming. And this is not our main job. So, I think we're finally into kind of a groove. But I mean, did you guys, besides the fact, that we're ecstatic that it happened, did you see any, feel like we had any difficulties or any frustrations about this?
I mean, the biggest thing was just, I think we already are good at chatting with each other and talking with each other and having that flow. But I think the pod flow had to be established. Our interview flow had to be established. So I think that was a big learning curve for all of us, was like seeing how, we could chat on the back end and, hey, all right, I'm going to jump in here, or I'm going to go in there. And we kind of like knew how to adjust midstream, where I think early on it was almost, that learning curve of that.
Yeah.
Hey, Cosmo.
And then we have
a special guest, children and dog. Yeah.
Well, that's another difficulty, right? Is finding time to
juggling family and life responsibilities, right? Especially for you guys as dads, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I know Joe is right now, while we're talking, he's talking to his son, and his life has gotten crazier since things have gotten back to normal. I mean, just finding time to record at first wasn't too big of an issue, but now it's,
Well, yes, and that was my daughter came running down with our dog Cosmo. She had some news, some gossip, some hot gossip, some hot tea she was about to spill. I'm like, tell me after the recording. I want to hear all about it. But yeah, it was much easier. It was not say much easier, but it was easier. Like you guys were saying, we were in lockdown in the beginning.
Yeah,
there was nowhere to go. Especially for me, as I've said many times on the podcast, my kids play soccer, a lot of soccer, especially the last few weekends, been really ramped up. So there was no tournaments, there was no practices, and it really opened up our whole, schedule. But life is getting even more and more back to normal. And luckily, most of us are still working from home, or at least most of the time.
And we're all vaxxed. So
we're all vaxxed. I think we're definitely going to try to do more in-person recordings. We're going to, that's going to be something, hopefully, that will make things a little easier for us to edit and, get things going. But, I think moving forward, I personally, having done like a music blog when I was in grad school, and I tried to, I was happy I did it for a year, and then I moved it on for like almost 2 years, and then, my life got in the way. I just think that it's a big testament to the fact that we really like doing this and that we want to do this and that there's a passion of ours that we're even at this point where we're saying, hey, we're a year in. So, we hope to continue to do this once a month at the very least. I mean, I'm just happy at the feedback that we've been getting. Everyone I've talked to has been giving us, a lot of support and, positive feedback on it. And I'm just happy that people are listening and they're enjoying what they're hearing too, which, makes me want to do this even more.
Yeah. And we're getting listeners from around the world, which is interesting too.
Yeah.
And people that, have heard that are bigger names have given us props as far as, what we bring to the table. They didn't like turn our podcast off listening through. So that's a good sign. Or they said yes to interviews. So it's.
Oh yeah. And that's the other thing. I mean, like just the guests, like that's another thing I'm amazed at. Like we had our first guest was Rob Mitchum, who I just randomly emailed.
Cold email,
cold emailed. Didn't know him from anything, read an article that he had written and was like, let's get this guy on. He said, sure. And now he's been on twice and we'll probably have him on again.
He's great.
Yeah,
and he's an awesome guy.
Great guest.
And then to have Chris Ballou from Presidents of the United States of America, also as Casper Baby Pants, again, literally just emailed, messaged through his contact form. And he said, yes. Tonight's guest, Steve Gorman,
he was one of our biggest hits, at the beginning of this. We were like, okay, we got Mitchum. So maybe then we'll get Steve Hayden, who we still hope to get. We were going to have him, and then his schedule kind of got crazy and he had to back out. He's a rock writer, if you don't know. And then we're like, okay, so Hayden wrote this book with Gorman, then we'll get Gorman on. And then, again, just one night I was like, you know what? I'm just going to send this out. I'm getting antsy. I'm just like, we got to get something. And, it took a few days for him to respond. He's like, yeah, man, let's, email me. I think I'm just amazed at some of the guests that we've had on, even I think Ricky Johnson. I think that was a great conversation. Oh my God.
Such
a good conversation. Yeah.
And I know that we when we have some more guests that we have on a list of potential guests that we'd hope to have on.
I think the best part about the guest was surprising our friends, especially about Steve Gorman. That was the highlight reaction. Of everything.
Yes.
Almost as much as talking to Steve Gorman was surprising our friend. Look who we're talking to. Yeah, we're also huge Black Crowes fans. So
I hope that some people, enjoyed some of our earlier parenting, ideas, especially about explicit content. The concerts one, even discussing, having the bit about, I know we got some really good feedback on that too, which was, great. I think our friend Norm even said, that was a great, point about, not our lives totally changed. Right, Joe?
Yes. I want to shout out Norm, who, I talked about, I think 30 concerts that me and him attended together, but I didn't actually say his name. So I want to shout out Norm during our Montclair State days, late 90s, early 2000s, of all the amazing concerts we attended during those years. But the concert one was definitely one of the highlights. For me, and also
a lot of good feedback from that one.
Adam Schenker.
Oh yeah,
was a great guest. We're definitely going to have him back on, probably for. Well, it could be a lot of things. It could be possibly a vinyl episode. I mean, I just want to do a tour of his basement and all the posters. I mean, you should have seen. We were on Zoom during it, and after the interview, he kind of gave us walked around his basement, and it was like, wow, we could just do an episode on this, on his posters.
It's like a rock hall exhibit.
Many rooms, multiple rooms of just 50 to 100 posters or more. I guess more.
Yeah. And, we'll reach for the stars. But yeah, I think we're going to keep going with this as far as we can. And, thank you for those of you who have been listening. And if this is your first time listening because you want to listen to our interview with Gorman and you haven't already skipped ahead to that, thanks for listening. Hope you enjoy it. And, I think we'll see how things go for the next year.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you guys for being good co-hosts and, being good researchers and interviewers. That helps my job.
Yeah, definitely want to thank the fans out there. People listening, like Josh said, it's your first time. Definitely check out our older episodes, some of the topics we've been just talking about now, and but definitely stay tuned for a really, really awesome interview with one of our favorite rockers from one of our favorite all-time bands.
And I guess it's time. Let's get to that interview with Steve Gorman. Hi, everyone. Josh here. Real quick. While we try to keep our shows clean for all ears to listen, this episode isn't fully kid or work appropriate. So if you don't already listen with headphones or while you're driving to work alone, we highly suggest you do just that for this episode.
To say today's episode is special would be an understatement. He is someone that was at the very top of our list of dream guests when we started the podcast last year. I don't think we honestly ever thought we would get the chance to interview him.
He is an author, a nationally syndicated radio show host, and most notably, the former drummer of the Black Crowes and a huge drumming influence to both Joe and I, Mr. Steve Gorman. Steve, welcome to Dad Rocks.
It's a pleasure to be here, gentlemen. The dad thing, it just sucked me right in. I'll just, I was like, fuck. Okay, I'll talk to some dads. I've been there. I know how difficult this transition is.
How has this last year been for you?
It's not been as bad for me as it's been for a lot of people. So I remind myself of that every day when I start to climb the walls and pull my hair out and lose my mind over the fact that I can't go out and play shows or do any of the normal things I want to do. As you mentioned, I do have a radio show, and once we figured out how to keep that show making sense from home, there was a minor adjustment for a week or two of how do we do this show. Once we figured that out, that settled in, all of which to say, I have an awful lot of musician friends who don't have something else to do. They are touring musicians who for years and in some cases decades have just jumped on the next bus for the next guy who called. And when that all ended, their entire worldview changed pretty dramatically, really swiftly. So I feel really just very fortunate to have had other things to keep me occupied during this time.
Yeah, I was actually curious. You're mentioning recording from home because I heard you mention being inside of a studio named after your sponsor, but I wasn't sure if you guys had moved to all remote. Like technically, how does the show work for you in April?
It's not unlike what we're doing right now. We just connect and we record segments together, but we're not necessarily together. Mm-hmm. The show is still, we do it every day. I mean, a lot of the kind of show we do, like a syndicated classic rock show, an awful lot of those are done. The host comes in and just does a series of segments for the next 6 weeks or
all
whatever.
The bumps and stuff. Yeah,
we do the show every day. I mean, we just get up, put the log together, and then come up with our segments. And we just want it to feel fresh and want it to be, classic rock's interesting. It's, as I say, it's songs everybody's heard a billion times, but there's a reason you've heard them a billion times. Yeah, and the billion and first time still sounds pretty good, So we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, but we are trying to keep a show that's focusing on music from a long time ago as fresh as we possibly can.
Are you curating the playlist, like the musical playlist?
It's a group endeavor. And I'll be honest, if I were the one curating it, there'd be a ton of music no one's ever heard before, and that's not how this format works.
Sure. A 5-hour show is a long show to.
Well, it's 50 songs a night. It's 10 hours. It's 10 songs an hour, and the truth is that we're, like I said, we're not trying to reinvent the format. You can go pretty far out. You don't want to go too far out because syndicated radio is very different than local radio. I don't want to bore anyone listening to this with all the nuts and bolts of how radio works, but there are people not named Steve Gorman who study radio trends and who study what listeners want and who have a really good grasp on all those things. And I'm the host of a show that's giving an audience something that we know they want. But within the context of a well-oiled framework, I think our show is pretty fresh. I mean, because we do it every day, I do talk about things that happen today. You know what I mean? Like in that realm, you got to remember the entire context of what we're doing. And coming from a world-rated sports talk radio for years and years, it wouldn't make sense otherwise because that's all about what's happening right now. It's like that's live. It has to be live. And so this show originally was live. Until the pandemic hit, I was sitting in the studio every night for 5 hours, playing air drums and listening to music and figuring out what I was going to talk about. And now, as it turns out, we just do the show in the late afternoon, right before it hits the air. We're recording the segments, and we can still during the course of the night, if something happens, I jump in and say, hold on, let's re-record this and put this up. It's all credit to my producer, Sarah, who's, a whirling dervish of a technical wizard.
You have your radio show, but you also have your current band, Trigger Hippie. Obviously that they were supposed to be, I think, or you were on tour early on in 2020, or there was going to be another tour, and obviously that's been put on hold. But were there any other projects, major projects that you had to put on hold because of this pandemic, or was it pretty much just the band?
There was the band. There was a book tour that was, I had been doing bits and bops and hitting here and there, but we had a whole thing that we were just about to announce where I was really going to go hit a bunch of places all in a row. That went away. And then I had several projects that were in development, that are still in development, various things. There was a couple of, there were some interesting things floating around that may or may not have happened anyway, but, you know, they went away because everything did. One other project that's a wholly new thing that I'm not at liberty to discuss right now has not gone away. It's just been delayed. And that will be, I'll be talking about that soon enough. And that's really exciting. So,
cool.
You know, I've managed to stay busy with, I mean, the show obviously takes up a lot of time, but then the rest of whatever else I was trying to do, for the most part, beyond Trigger Hippie, everything else just kind of ran its course. So Trigger Hippie and then this one other thing, which I will be discussing soon enough, are still very much alive and just waiting for the, you know, the green flag to wave so we can get back to it.
So right now you're in Nashville, right?
Yeah.
So how long have you been there, and like what brought you to the city? Because I know that you were born in Maryland and you basically grew up in Kentucky. So I wasn't sure if it was like, you know, you felt as Nashville was like your home or what, or
Josh, I hate to break it to you. I was born in Michigan.
No, I apologize. I think I read
Midwestern boy.
I guess the Wikipedia is wrong. So
go figure.
It's never wrong.
No, I was born in Muskegon, Michigan. My parents are both Detroit natives, and so it's very much a Detroit family that had moved up to the west coast of Michigan. I'm the youngest of 8, and my dad bounced around a lot. So I had, you know, like in my family, there were 3 kids born in Detroit, 2 born in New Jersey, and then 3 more born in Muskegon, Michigan. And then when I was a baby, we moved, or a toddler, actually, we moved to, I say Baltimore, Maryland. It was actually Severna Park, Maryland is where we lived.
I have a couple of friends from there, yeah.
Okay, my dad worked in Baltimore. We lived in Severna Park, which is just south of the city. And I lived there till I was 10, and that's when I moved to Kentucky at 10 years old. So Nashville, from the time I was 10 years old, was the city that had that was the place where you went if you lived in Hopkinsville to, I mean, to go to an airport, to see a foreign film, to see a concert, to go to Opryland to ride roller coasters. Everything was Nashville. So I was very familiar with Nashville. And then as a college student, specifically at Western Kentucky University, I was in Nashville many, many, many weekends, because that is where I went to see all the bands I loved. And in the 80s, you know, the club scene in the South was pretty exuberant and really spectacularly inspirational.
Yeah. I mean, because that's what brought you eventually to Georgia, was that Atlanta-Athens scene, right? Besides
what originally brought me to Atlanta was a buddy of mine, that a kid I'd gone to high school with in Kentucky named Clint Steele. He was from Atlanta, and then he moved up to Kentucky. His dad got a job there of some sort for high school, you know, so he spent most of his life in Atlanta. Showed up for a few years of high school in a small town in Kentucky. We became great friends. And then I went off to college. He ended up going to college in Massachusetts, but we stayed in touch, and we were always huge music fans together. You know, he was one of my music buddies. And he's the guy who called and said, "Do you want to start a band?" And I said, yes. And originally he said, "Let's do it in Boston," because he was going to college in Massachusetts. And I said, cool. And then, you know, a few weeks later, he goes, "Actually, Atlanta's way cheaper and it's not as cold." And I said, cool. I mean, I honestly didn't care where we were going to do it, but I was really happy he said Atlanta, because, as you said, it was close to Athens. And it just was still in the Southeast. I felt familiar there. I'd never been to Boston. I had spent, you know, a couple of days of my life in Atlanta, so at least that felt a little more familiar.
Right.
But I would have gone anywhere. I mean, I didn't really care that much. But he said, "Let's do it in Atlanta," and I said, "Sure."
And was that "Marry My Hope"? Was that the band that you were? Yep.
Yep.
And was that like the first band you really drummed in, or had you drummed in bands before?
There's no like. I mean, that was it. Up to that point, I had played drums a handful of times. My freshman year of college, fall of '83, at Western Kentucky University, I was conscripted into a band that my older brother had started years ago, and it was all a joke. It was a Andy Kaufman performance art joke. He had a band in college. He had a band in college called Alfred and the Stately Wayne Manors.
Okay.
And now this is in the 80s, before the first Batman movie. This was hip in the 80s. Early 80s.
Yeah.
Yep.
Alfred and the Stately Wayne Manors. My brother was Alfred, and they were just guys at Western Kentucky University that would put flyers up for a gig, and then every gig was canceled due to family emergency. Like, it really was just performance art. It was just my brother and some friends that loved music that, of course, were dying to be in a band but had no talent or any idea how to do that. They just had this shtick that they ran. This is guys that grew up obsessing over Monty Python and SCTV and Saturday Night Live, the early days. And this is just a natural extension of their fandom of those things. And so it was a shtick that, like, I was in high school when he was in college, and I was always aware of it, and I always thought it was hilarious. And, he had they would make flyers and put them up, Alfred and Stately Wayne Manors. And then they would follow up with, they would make a smaller flyer to go over the first one that said canceled in big letters. They just were, they were having fun. And so when I got to school, because I had literally sat behind a drum kit and played a straight beat like twice in my life, my brother was like, well, you can actually play drums. We can actually be a band now. Like, let's actually do this. And it really came, well, all right, I'm getting way in the weeds here, but some of the guys that my brother Dave Gorman, he was good friends with his buddy Mike Fox. And Mike Fox is from Nashville, and all these guys in Nashville had an annual standing New Year's Eve party. So New Year's Eve 83 is going to be the worldwide premiere of Alfred and the Stately Wayne Manors. They finally had a drummer, me. And I'd literally played drums for 7 minutes. And so I had to find somebody with a kit and borrow it. I had to go through all that. But they had a guitar player, a guy named Jeff, who could play enough. And we found a bass player who was actually really good. So, if the bass player is good, everyone else can fake it. And my brother, as the singer, could totally fake it. And we played a New Year's Eve party my freshman year at college, 83, 84 New Year's Eve. And we learned like 12 songs. And that was it. I was like, the next morning, I'm telling everybody, we got to do this for real. Let's be a band. And they're all looking at me like I'm insane because this is their drunken college joke band. And I'm saying, no, really, let's go be REM. Come on. And so we played that party for 3 years in a row, 83, 84, and 85. And after the third one, I was finally so desperate to really be in a band. I found some other guys up in Bowling Green. The rugby team at Western, it was a club team. They all rented this house. They had this one house. And so we started a series of shows where we were the rugby house band. And the rugby team, bunch of guys from Kentucky trying to be English rugby players. So, of course, there was kegs, and they got drunker than shit, and they all had to fight. It was ridiculous. But we, for a series of Friday nights in 1986, me and some buddies played there, and we changed the name of the band every gig, which is not a good way to build a band. The marketing is way off when you change your name every gig. But so we were, Baby Faye and the Heartless Baboons. I don't know how old you guys are, but there was a baboon heart that was put into a child named Faye. Yeah, literally as a baboon heart transplant to a child named Baby Faye. So we were Baby Faye and the Heartless Baboons. We were Coupe de Ville and the Autos. We were all these various, I was Dodge Dart that night. Everyone had a band, Stu DeBaker was our guitarist. It's just college shtick. Every time I would sit down and play, I was twice as good as the time before. And I was aware of that. And I wasn't going to say that to anybody because I knew that sounded crazy, but I kept going, fuck, man, I'm really good at this. And this is all I ever really wanted to do. And it was sort of like such a dream thing. I couldn't imagine taking it seriously because that's just too much of a, oh my God, what does that even mean? So with all that as a bit of a backdrop, September of 86, I'm starting my senior year of college, and I'm really panicking about that fact because I was supposed to drop out and start a band years ago. My buddy called me and said, you're playing drums, right? And I said, oh, yeah, done. Let's go. And, next thing you know, I moved to Atlanta, and we started a band. And my friend Clint, who made that phone call, he had rented a house with Sven Pippian, his bass player, later, obviously, a huge part of the Black Crowes. And the other roommate was their friend, Chris Robinson.
Wow.
And so that's how this whole thing started.
And you had mentioned in your book and I heard in other interviews too, just even before you started really playing for real, you always were kind of focused a little bit on drums, like you were tapping along, listening to music, or kind of always zeroing in when you listen to music to the drummer. Is that true?
Yeah, not a little bit. I was a drummer from the time I was 5. I just didn't do anything about it. Like I literally looked at myself and I told people, oh, I'm a drummer. I mean, I would say that to people. I remember hearing myself saying that. I had nothing to back that up other than in my head, I knew I was a drummer. And that was a very real thing I was 5 years old when I made that discovery about myself, and it never went away. I mean, all it did was gather steam for 16 years. And then when I was 21, I finally bought a drum kit.
And one thing that Josh and I love about your drumming is that you never get too busy. You're more of a field drummer, which I am as well, totally, than like technical, crazy drummer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't care too. I mean, even Steve Gadd has incredible feel. That's why he's great. Right. Like we can talk about the song Asia all day long, but honestly, but like the fills are incredible and the beats are amazing, but it feels right. You know what I mean? Like feel is the entire story.
Absolutely.
Yep, I mean, it really is that simple. That's not shtick. I'm not trying to be like, I'm not defending my lack of fills. My concern has always been feel. My favorite drummer has always been Ringo. My second favorite is John Bonham. And then there's a billion guys behind those two. But those two guys have the best swing in rock and roll. And that's always what has resonated with me the most.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, it's just, I grew up listening to, obviously the Crows and, the Beatles, but I also listened to Rush. So when I was younger, I always wanted to play as fast or as crazy as Neil Peart. And so that's, to me, it didn't work out.
Just wondering, maybe you're the second Neil Peart and I just haven't heard of you yet.
No, but it's like, as I got older and realized, I'm not putting the effort in to learn all the technical stuff, but I'm still playing gigs. I had one audition for a jazz program where the guys who was running it got his sax on and started playing with me, and I wasn't doing anything crazy. It's all about feel. And that was kind of like, a lightning bolt moment for me. It was like, well, I just got to keep it simple and just lock in with the band. Yeah. And not try to do too much. So, that's
and again, that comes down to, Neil Peart's a very special case. He joined a band that only had two other guys, and they were cool with him playing that way. You know what I mean? And a lot of people that can play like that don't have the same sensibility as Neil Peart. Like, it took me a while to figure out his greatness. Obviously, technically speaking, I mean, that shit's amazing. Yeah. And I'll be honest, it's only been in the last 10 or 15 years that I actually spent time listening to him where I realized, like, oh, there's feel all over that stuff. Like that's this bizarre, like, there's a lot of really fast drummers, a lot of really technically precise drummers that don't do anything for me. And then I started going, once I got past my innate bias against Rush based solely on the guys I knew in high school that liked Rush, I was like, man, this guy's fucking special. I mean, it's like, no shit, Steve, but it really was. Like, I never said, when he died, I wrote a thing that day, and I wrote, he's never been my guy. I'm not about to say he is now, but holy shit, what a fucking thing to leave behind. Like jazz, you don't have to understand jazz to be moved by it, especially with the drummers. There's a reason everyone knows who Elvin Jones is, and it's not because he's got the best chops. There's just something about that guy's swing that's just like, you're like, it can be in the background at a restaurant, or it can be loud as hell on the speakers in your car, and you're just like, man, check that out. Drumming is about feel in music that I care about. And for that matter, listen to the first Devo album. That drumming's unbelievable on that record. You can't replicate that shit. It's like, it's all choppy and weird and bizarre, but it still is a band playing live in the studio. And that guy, Alan Meyer, was fucking fantastic.
I noticed you just tweeted about Devo, about their appearance on Fridays.
It's incredible. Watch that whole thing. That band was so, they clearly made their mark right when they hit the national scene, but they were lapping themselves. They were way ahead of where people, I think, at the time even realized. They just happened to have some catchy songs and funny uniforms, but they were amazing. Their entire mindset and what they were doing and why they were doing it is incredible to me.
I wanted to ask you about just your drumming on Shake Your Moneymaker. I mean, that was such a big album for me. I was like 11, 12 years old, just getting into drumming. Mm-hmm. I think that was one of my first 5 CDs I ever bought. I mean, that was such a key album that I learned drumming to. Even just obviously Hard to Handle has become an iconic drum intro. I mean, as big as any Ringo intro, any Bonham. I mean, that is one of the best, and it's just all feel twice as hard, the whole album. I mean, what was your approach going into the studio recording that? Was that your first real studio session, real session?
Oh, yeah. Well, I had done a couple of sessions before that. I did one in 1987 when I had been playing for all of 3 months. And then I did one, that was Mr. Crow's Garden. Before I was actually in Mr. Crow's Garden, they just had a demo opportunity with A&M Records. It didn't really lead anywhere. It was just one song. I think they had done one before I even joined the band. Before me, they had done one, and then we went back for a second one. That is the greatest example of being so far in over your head, you don't even, you think you're flying. You know what I mean? It's just, reality has left the building, and if I just pretend I'm here and okay. Because I bought that drum kit in March of 87, and this is probably June, and I'm in a studio in North Carolina with a 24-track desk and a real producer who'd made a Rain Parade record, and I'm just he's putting mics on the kit. I've seen a Fostex 4-track recorder once in my life before, and now I'm in this real studio. A year later, after we had met George Drakoulias, we did a couple days in a studio in Atlanta with him in July of 88, and that was the second time. And then, unless I'm somehow forgetting something else, Shake Your Moneymaker was the third time I'd ever been in a real studio.
Crazy.
Wow.
Again, in over my head doesn't begin to describe it, looking back. But, arrogance and charm can bring you a long way in life, as Mr. Crow's Garden learned. It was a real boomerang. I went from being supremely confident to terribly insecure in a minute's time 5 million times during a 3-week period. You know, it was just really... I did feel like, because I started so late, I didn't get my first kit till I was 21, and now this is all of 2 years later, but I just felt like I was behind the 8 ball the whole time. Man, everyone else was doing this in high school. I'm late. I got to do this. I'm not going to have another chance. I just had this whole sense that it was all or nothing. I'd played sports growing up my whole life too. And so I'd been in I look now, I didn't think about it then, but now I look back and I'm like, oh, that's just a district tournament again. It's it's all or nothing. What are you going to do? I'm like, and I always had that sense of, well, I'm going down swinging. This might not work, but it's not going to be because I chickened out. And so those sessions were really, really rough for a few days. And once, this is in the book, once I figured out George's just his terminology about working with a click track, it got a lot better. I had to have a nervous breakdown in order to figure out how to relax and play in the studio. But once I did, it was fine. I think we were there for a little less than 3 full weeks. And I don't think one of those tracks was done in the first week. Everything once it just took a while to click. And then once it did, and that wasn't just me, he wanted the tracks to feel good. He wanted the rhythm section to at least click. And Johnny had just joined the band. And Rich and I we were just learning how to play our instruments. Where we were in 1989 compared to where we were in 1991 when we made Southern Harmony is night and day as individual players and as a collective band. So it was really stressful. It wasn't, when we got a track and when George and Brenda would go, that's it. The relief was, was unbelievable. But, overall, it was just... It was just stressful. It was just like a perfect it was a perfect, by the way, get used to stress, kid. This is going to be a bumpy ride. You know, it was pretty, looking back, it was like, yeah, that's how it's going to be. The results are going to be great, and it's going to be hard as hell to get there.
So as you alluded to, and obviously as the title of the podcast, we discuss parenthood and being fathers. You have 2 kids, right?
Yep.
And they're 20-ish?
20 and 18.
Okay.
They will be 21 and 19 this summer.
Was becoming a dad something that you always wanted to, be? Was, fatherhood something that you always saw in your future?
I think I always just assumed it. More than I wanted it, I just assumed that was going to be the case, I'm the youngest of 8, and I have 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and all but one are parents. And, I had my first nephew was born when I was 15 in 1980. And so I just turned 15, and then a bunch more came right after that. I have a ton of adult nephews and nieces. Yeah. So I was just around that. And, you just, as the youngest of such a big family, I mean, so much of who I am and what I see in the world is from my siblings, from growing up being the last duck in the little row of ducks going to the lake. And so that being a parent is just one of those things. I don't think I ever really seriously thought about it. It's funny. My wife and I got married. I don't think we ever discussed having kids before we got married. It was just we got married. And then, and then one day it's like, hey, are we going to do that? Like, what's the story? Like, what are we thinking? And it was as late, our son was born in the year 2000. And I remember in 1999 definitively saying, okay, 2000 is baby year, with this thought in our head, like, we'll just make this happen. Obviously there's, it's not that simple. And I do look back now and go, well, we were just lucky that it worked out that way. But we made this decision in early 1999 to go, to take 1 year. It was like the band was going to be really busy for 99. We just said, just come on the road and just travel as much as you can this year. Because once the baby comes, we ain't on the road as much. You're not going to be there. And so that was our loose plan. It was just that simple. So for a lot of that year, and it really, actually, this goes back to the summer of 98. So from the summer 98 through the summer 99, Rosemary was out on the road more than she'd ever been before. I was just like, every time we get an itinerary, just look at it and figure out where you want to be. Like, where do you want to go? Just come out then and see all these places. And so as it turned out, by the summer of 99, we were at the end of the summer. We'd been doing this perfectly. And then it was time to like, okay, so if we want a baby next year, let's really start to think about this. And that was also the time when I decided I was going to quit the band. Like, I was like, okay, I'm ready to leave. I'm done. This is time. And then Jimmy Page decided he wanted to do some dates, and would we want to as well? And the answer is hell yes. And so suddenly I'm back in the band. And next thing you know, like all of 2000 is booked with Page. We've got a big year ahead of us. And we were like, well, we're going to have this baby, right? Let's just go. I don't know. That was all sort of connected at the same time. And so, yeah, our son was born the summer of 2000 in between legs of the Jimmy Page tour. He arrived a week late, but still within the framework of what we had hoped he would do when we booked the dates. Like, we took a break around that due date, hoping against, okay, well, let's just make sure he shows up when I'm home, and it worked out.
Bringing that up, I was curious, because you mentioned that you were planning on quitting the band, and then Paige came in, and then you guys recorded Lions. I think your son, you said, I guess, was born before Lions was recorded, and then after Lions, at the end of 2001, I guess maybe it was October 2001, the band goes on hiatus, and you then have like 3.5 years or whatever before you come back in. Did you feel fortunate and or relieved that you were given that opportunity to be at home with your new, child?
Oh,
and I guess you had your second one.
Our daughter showed up in the summer of 2002, and at that time, we moved out to LA in the spring of 2002. I had some things I was working up then. I had a whole project. Actually, I was writing with a great comedy writer, my good friend Jeff Cesario, and we had a TV show that we were developing. We moved to LA with the thinking, well, we'll be here for a few years, and then let's figure out either we'll stay there, but if not, let's figure out where we're going to be forever and then just get established. Like our mindset was, once our son starts school, like, 2005 or 6, first grade, let's just be somewhere and stay. Like that was maybe it's LA, but let's get out there and figure it out. Right. So we went out there thinking this may only be a few years, but I wanted to investigate that. As soon as I got to LA, I started playing with a lot of people. I went out there to write this thing, and that went really well, and it was incredibly educational, and it was a blast. And then I also was drumming with a lot of folks, just a whole lot of things, nothing major, just a lot of people were putting together a project. Hey, do you want to jam? Do you want to jam? I'd go sit in or do sessions. George was hiring me. George DeCoulius got me in the studio a bunch. So I was just staying busy. But when our daughter was born in June of 2002, for the rest of that year, I didn't have to do much. I was just at home. And so, with a toddler and a baby, LA is great because it's just good weather and you can just open the back door and they're in a fenced-in backyard and there's a big dog to bark if weird people show up. And it was just a really easy place to be in that situation. So to answer your question, yeah, it was fantastic. My daughter, she was 18 months old when I went on tour with Stereophonics, and it was really difficult. I mean, it was definitely a change, When the Black Crowes toured in 2001, it's fun. Going back, my wife Rosemary and I were like, well, you won't be on the road once we have a baby. Well, that's not true. They were on the road a ton in 2001. My son celebrated his first birthday in Tokyo. You know what I mean? Like it was just like, oh, I guess we just have an extra seat for the baby seat on the plane. It's like, oh, it's not as difficult as we imagined. So they did travel a bunch, but then, we had 18 months with 2 kids where, I would put them to bed every night, and it was just fantastic. I really wasn't climbing the walls. I wasn't thinking about, I wish I was on the road at all. I was just completely into that mode. I was working on this other project with Jeff Cesario, and I was home, and it was great.
When, you mentioned how your family did come on the road with you when you were touring with the Stereophonics and even, back with in the Lions tour. When you did officially rejoin the band in 2005 and you guys were touring nonstop, how often was your family on tour with you? And were you the only guy with a family in tow?
No. Well, at that time, let me think about it. I mean, Chris and Kate had a son. And so Ryder was out a good bit. And, Rich had 2 sons at that point with from his first marriage. And they were the same age roughly as ours. His oldest was a little older. And then his son, his second son and my son are the same age. And so they were around a little bit, but for 05 and 06, my kids were out a lot more often, I think, than anybody else's, just for whatever reason. They were still at an age where they didn't have their own lives yet. Once kids hit 9 or 10, suddenly they're like, I don't want to go on tour with you. I want to be with my friends, And so at 3 and 5 and 4 and 6, those early, once the band got back together, my kids were more than happy. They were just going wherever we were going and they weren't thinking twice about it.
Awesome. Now, just to get back to the idea of being a father, for a lot of people, it changes their perspective on life. It has a major impact on them. But did it change your outlook on, everything or some things or, being a musician, a touring musician?
On everything. On absolutely everything. Yeah. I mean, as much as anybody, I thought I knew what to expect. And again, I'd been an uncle many times for many years. I'd been around friends who'd gone through this. All my friends had kids. My wife and I were 35 when our son was born. So we had a lot of friends who'd already beaten us to the punch. But no, the day he was born, I mean, that night, he was born in New York. We lived in Brooklyn. He was born at a hospital in Manhattan. And I can remember the night he was born, sitting in the hospital, my wife just, asleep, he's asleep, and I'm sitting in this hospital room. It was at St. Vincent's on the west side, like at 14th. And I'm staring out of our window downtown at the World Trade Center, and I'm just sitting there going, first of all, I'm like, oh my God, we live in New York City. Like, all right, hey. And then we have a baby now, and he's right there. And that whole night was spent just sort of thinking back to how did all this happen? I really did spend his first night when he and Rosemary were asleep anyway. I was just looking back at the last 13 years going, man, I can't believe all that's happened. This is wild. And then the next day, he was born on July 24th. July 25th, I woke up, after sleeping in a chair with a crick in my neck for 36 minutes. And I turned on the TV, and the Concorde crash in Paris was that day. You remember when there was that famous Concorde, the wing was on fire. And I only mention that because I remember looking at that and just being so horrified, like, oh my God, the world is a scary place. And why is this baby going to be subjected to these things? It's just, and I remember I was laughing at myself going, what are you doing? Like I suddenly felt like I had to put him in bubble wrap and protect him from all of the elements of the world. And I was home for about a week and a half, and then I had to go out for the next leg of the tour with Jimmy Page. And when I got to Albuquerque for the first show, walking around that venue that day, I just had a bunch of photos that I was showing everybody, like, look at my babe, look at this beautiful boy. Can you believe this? I'd never been a dad at a gig before. I mean, it was very, very different. I was just like, I missed somebody so much I couldn't stand it. You know what I mean? I could call my wife and we could talk. I can't talk to a 17-day-old baby, or whatever it was. I'm like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be there. So I was hit pretty hard with a sense of, man, this is not cool. Wait a minute, he's not going to know who I am. I wasn't thinking about in one day, but the plan was we were going to be on the road up until November. This was August, and I was really starting to freak out about that. I mean, unluckily and luckily, the tour was canceled 2 days later, and I went home. The great silver lining of losing that tour that I was having a blast on was I missed 4 days of my son's life, and I was back, and I was like, all right, that's cool. I'm fine. That's just where I wanted to be.
Sometimes life is weird like that, and
Well, and I mean, I had gone through so much already of my own personal torture that I was, putting myself through. The band was a difficult place to be. I'm at some point coming to grips with my own issues, my codependency and my this and that and my blind loyalty and all of these various things that are huge parts of my personality that I've had to really face and try to, make manageable. From the minute he was born, a whole lot of that gray area just dissipated. Like literally. Oh, none of that fucking matters. Okay, you want to throw drama at me? Go ahead. I don't care. Like I'm just going to take care of this kid now. Like
Yep.
And another thing is that I immediately, for the first time ever, I looked at my own father very differently. I looked at my parents like I was 35. I'm out on a huge tour with Jimmy Page. I'm living in Brooklyn, and like we have this great life in a great neighborhood in a great city on a great tour. I was right before my 35th birthday when my son was born. When my dad was 34, he had 6 kids. He had 2 more that were going to show up, and he was an assistant plant manager at Brunswick in Muskegon, Michigan, making like $36,000 a year. And I was like, oh, that might explain the tension. That might explain a lot of things, and then suddenly I realized like my job above everything else is to take care of this kid and give him a roof, like provide for him. And I immediately looked at my parents and went, oh my God, they did this for 8 of us. And again, that's one of those things, you can read it and you can intellectualize it, but until you're sitting there holding a baby, you don't have any sense of what it was like for anyone else who's ever been there. And to look at my own parents and my father especially, who I had a very difficult relationship with, to realize, God, he did this for 8 of us. And we're all okay. Like everybody got out of the house and was ready to go. My parents' mode of parenting, I think, was when you turn 18, you're on your own. So you better get ready. Like they prepared us. There was never any shortage of love. There was a lot of tough love. Even at really erratic moments, I never felt like I wasn't loved deeply. But I always knew that, man, there's going to be a moment when I got to do everything for myself. And that was, I look at my parents and say, well, they went 8 for 8 because everybody got out and did okay.
Yeah, that's great.
That stuff really gets simplified quick when you're holding your own baby.
Speaking of your parents, on the podcast, we talk a lot about our parents and growing up with their music tastes and how our parents either did or didn't influence at all our music taste? Did your parents, play music in the house, or was there any music going on in the house?
There was always music. My mom was a huge fan of like musicals and certain things, and she sang barbershop music, which is
cool.
A little to the white of white.
My mom was
but
yeah. That's one way to say it, yeah.
But she was really good at it, and she has a great passion for music. My dad didn't have any musical inclination. I have an older brother, Tom, who played guitar my whole life. He's the guy that handed me some Beatles records and said, here, listen to this, because he was sick of me playing my one Bee Gees album at the time. And he still plays. He lives in Denver, and he's retired and has a weekend bar band with friends in his 60s. He's a great player. But it's funny, somebody asked me the other day, like, the two biggest influences. I was like, well, the Beatles and my brother's garage band when he was a high school senior. Like that's the two things. The biggest band ever, and then a band that never played anywhere but my garage were the two things that really kicked me in the ass the most. So my parents didn't, I think most importantly, they didn't mind popular music. My mom liked the Beatles. Like I'd be in there listening to Beatles records, and she would come in and hum along and move her head a little bit, and I think punk and new wave threw a bit of a wrench for her, but then after she's heard a song a few times, she's humming along and doing her barbershop harmonies over, a B-52 song or something. And it's like, all right, cool, There was no they certainly didn't mind that I was obsessively listening to records in the basement all day. Nice. It wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing, because in my generation, I was born in 1965, there's plenty of kids who were still growing up in houses where they were like, stop listening to those rock records. And I never heard that once in my life.
That's awesome. And now as your kids got older and you were a dad, did you influence them, in certain music, or did they show you music that you would have never heard before? Because I have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old. They were showing me Billie Eilish years ago, or different stuff where before she blew up, where I would have never knew of her.
Well, that's happened for sure.
And so I would tell my friends, there's this girl, she's, doing this weird thing, and now she's, the biggest star. So.
Yeah, no, that's happened for sure. I mean, the stuff that they're really into, I would never go out and find on my own at all. And that's everything from a band like, 5 Seconds of Summer that my daughter was really into. Yep. She loves Taylor Swift. She loves but she likes a lot of bands. All Time Low. They're power pop. I don't know how you would classify them.
Emo pop, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
My son listens to everything, but he's the first guy who I ever heard the words Kendrick Lamar from, and he's really into rap and hip hop and very much into that. Yeah. But at the same time, he's in college now. He goes to Indiana University, and I'll open his door to his room and he's listening to, the other day he walked in the kitchen. He goes, hey, Dad. I go, yeah. And he goes, man, Steely Dan is fucking awesome. I was like, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And I learned early on that, they're both going to find their way. And he's got friends that are, that have introduced him to the Smiths and introduced him to REM and the Hoodoo Gurus and stuff. And it's way better that he finds it out for his friend. I just didn't want to be, at the end of the day, I'm still their dad, and I'm not supposed to introduce them to great music. I have friends who have raised their kids, and their kids are great, and they have great taste in music, and they raise their kids listening to Wilco. God damn it! I just wasn't going to be that. I just I'm my kids grew up going to Black Crow shows. Yeah. Right? That's that's like going to see your dad at work, and they did that, and they would sit right behind the drum kit with earplugs in, and then they'd get bored and they'd go to the dressing room and get an Orangina, and then they would come back out. If when are they playing Hard to Handle? Let's go check that one out, because they just like to see crowds cheer, or whatever. That's normal to them. And I think I picked up early on that they both really, they truly love music. My daughter goes to see concerts and she steps out of herself. She is, it's beautiful to be with her at a show, sitting 3 rows behind her. So she, I don't want to cramp her style. But, from the time she was in 8th grade, I'd take her to see shows, and she was into a lot of artists. And I'm drawing a blank, but I would take her to clubs to see artists where, it'd be an all ages show, but it was in clubs. And she would just hand me her phone and say, see ya. And I was like, oh, God bless her, because she was there for the experience,
Awesome.
And she's still, I swear the last year has been harder on her than anyone else in the family, because she hasn't been able to see live music.
We just, our last episode we recorded was just on concerts and just discussing how we miss them and everything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I'm sure I miss playing more, but some days I think I just want to go to a gig. Like I don't want to have to go rehearse and get back in shape. So I really just want to go see someone else who's done that. Yeah.
Exactly. So we have to ask you about your book that we all loved immensely. For those of you out there who haven't read it, it's called Hard to Handle: The Life and Death of the Black Crowes. It's amazing. All three of us were super into it, and our other friends as well. So much that we had actually a text chain for months on end, exclusively talking about this book and the stories.
You're gonna have to
and arguing.
You'll have to share that whole thread with me, or I'm not going to believe
taking sides with the various and others. I'm a huge Stephen Hayden fan. I mean, I followed him from his days writing for Bill Simmons and his podcast. I heard you on there a couple of times, and when he announced that he was doing the book with you, I knew it was like a perfect combination. Have you been thinking about doing that for a while before you met Stephen, or?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd been the guy that everybody always just would say, like, it was a throwaway line. Well, if anyone's going to write the book, it has to be Steve. Just because I have a really good memory and I'm a storyteller, and it just seemed like, generally speaking, everybody always looked at me like, well, that's the one guy who kind of sees things for what they are, if you will. But it was always a joke. I forgot all about the fact that in 2010, I forgot about this until a few years ago, when I started to write what became Hard to Handle. I was looking through all the files on my laptop, and in 2010, I actually thought then maybe I'll write the book during the tour in 2010, because I was quite confident that would be the last tour. And I thought, this is the time to write. And so I started writing, and as soon as we started putting the tour together, I realized, like, this is not, I can't possibly go play these shows and then get to a hotel and then write each day. It was just way too much to do in real time. And then by the end of that tour, the last thing I wanted to do was think about the Black Crowes. I was like, man, oh God, that just went into the ditch yet again. This is not cool. Like, I had lost my perspective again, as I had many times. And so I met Stephen Hayden in 2013 via Twitter. I responded to a tweet of his, and he came back right away, and we just had this brief exchange. And then suddenly there was a DM, and he just said, hey, man, I'm just so happy to see you. And Shake Your Moneymaker is the first cassette I ever bought at a Kmart in 1990, and right there. And I said, well, man, I've been a fan of your writing for a long time. And so we were going to Madison, Wisconsin shortly thereafter. And he said, I'm going to see you in Madison. And I just said, oh, dude, well, let's get a beer. Like, that'll be great. So that's where it started. And then he saw us in Madison. And then I guess a month later or so, we played Milwaukee, and he was at both those shows. And we just struck up a friendship that way and didn't talk about the Black Crowes really at all. When you do, you meet someone, you talk about anything else. So we were just talking about other records and, in sports and whatever. And I think at some point he had said something like, just after a while, he goes, man, you have so many stories, man. Have you ever thought about writing a book? And I said, well, I have thought about it, but it's just something that I don't know what would ever be the right time, because all I knew about it was it would take a long time. Like, I was like, I don't know when I have a year and a half or 2 years of my life to just put this together. And he said, like, totally innocent, well, man, if you ever want to talk about it, or if you ever need help. And I said, cool, that'd be great. And I really didn't think about it again. When ESPN pulled the cord on Grantland, which was at 2015 maybe, or 16.
Yeah, somewhere around there.
Yep, around there.
I texted him that morning. I said, hey, dude, I hope you're okay. If you have nothing to do, I guess we can write that book now. And I was totally kidding. Now, he, of course, thought that was like awesome, and he told me later that meant so much to him. And I was like, yeah, sorry, I was just saying that, man, But within a couple years, I was talking with him regular. He would, if he was in town, we get together. We're totally just buddies. You know what I mean? Like, just see him over, about every year we'd find ourselves in the same town, but we would text about stuff, mostly Packer games and Titans games, really. But I said at some point, I do remember saying, when after Ed Harsh died, he texted like, man, I'm so sorry and all that. I said, yeah, it's fucking horrible. Within a few weeks of that, I said, I just keep thinking about writing now. And he said, well, just let me know. And that was really, that's when this whole thing started. Like, there was such a finality to everything that I cared about where the Black Crowes were concerned with Ed's death, which is not to say I ever thought there was a future for the Black Crowes for me. Mm-hmm. I didn't think that, but it just was, if anything ever just shuts a door, it's a literal death. When someone's gone, when there's no more phone calls to be made or anything, it's like, oh, well, okay, this really is over in any situation. So for me, in the context of the Black Crowes, that was totally unexpected that would do that to me at the time. But I was like, oh man, okay, so everything's done now. Like there is no more chapter to be written. And how do I really think and feel? Like, where am I with all this? And what does this mean to me right now? And so I just kind of stewed on that for a few months. And sometime within 6 months, I'd say, of his passing, so sometime in 2017, I was like, okay, I think I see this right now. I think I get it. And then I still wanted to wait a while to see if it wasn't so much what I thought, but is my gut settled? Is everything where it is? And by the end of that year, sometime in 2018, I said, hey, man, I'm going to do this. And so are you serious? Do you really want to help? And he said, yeah. And I, of course, said, well, how does this work? He goes, hell, I don't know. I've never helped anyone write. I just write. And we established right away, like, okay, well, neither one of us knows what we're doing. So let's just see what happens. I think initially I thought to myself, well, maybe this will be the thing where I just tell him stories and he goes and writes a book. And as soon as we started, I realized like I can't do that. I got to write this. I mean, I've always written. I'm happy to write. I just wasn't sure what would make sense. But then as soon as we started talking about it, he came up with the idea. He said, well, look, how about this? How about we get together over the few weekends, over the next few months, and let's just sit down. And because I told him I have a good linear chronological memory. You know, I don't have to bounce around. And he said, well, let's just sit down and I'll just prompt you with questions and let me just record you telling all these stories. And then let's take that transcript and then frame out a book that you can then go write. And so basically, like we did the Cliff Notes first. He had hours of me talking and us having conversations. We're looking at that and he's going, well, here's the story, right? I mean, like I told him, I said, look, I can write this book, but I need a map because I'll write for 9 years. You know, I'll just never stop. I'll just keep going back and adding detail. We charted a course. We laid out 40 chapters and said, chapter 1's going to start here and it's going to end here. And in the middle, make sure you mention these 3 things. So like, you know, that chapter was a series of bullet points that I would then sit down and turn into a 5,000 word chapter. And along the way, of course, there's a million things that I'd forgot to tell him that came up. And then there's a bunch of, you know, and then I just went and wrote and wrote and wrote. And I wrote, you know, over 900 pages was the original manuscript that we turned in. And as I was writing it, I'm editing for flow in real time. But I did it in order. Like I said, I got to write chapter 1 and then I got to write chapter 2. There was never a moment where I could have written a book where I just woke up with inspiration. I'm going to write that story that happened in 1997 right now. Like that wouldn't have worked for me. So I did write it in order. Certain days, nothing happens. Certain days, I can't stop. And when I would say a chapter's done, when I got to where I wanted to end a chapter, I would then start over and I would read it aloud to get the tone. I would hear myself. And then after, you know, each day, several days on every chapter at least, when I felt good about it, I would send it to him. And he would just say, looks great, man. It's kind of long. And I was like, it's pretty long, you know, and he knew things that I didn't know, which is a publisher doesn't want to print a 900-page book. It costs a lot. You know, I'm not thinking that way. I'm just telling the story. My deadline was Halloween of 2018, and that's the day we turned it in. He said, I think it's great, but it's really, really long. I was like, no, let him read it first. Let's just make sure. And of course, we turned it in, and right away it came back like, hey, great job. What the fuck is this? Like, you know... They were looking for 250 pages, you know. So then Stephen put on his cape again and said, okay, well, as you've been sending me chapters, I've been already kind of marking in my head what I think could be cut. Things that don't interrupt the overall narrative. He would say, like, these 5 stories are all great, but for the greater purpose of the book, they tell the same story. So just pick which one you think which one do you like the most? That was incredibly helpful because my first response to someone telling me it's too long and you got to cut it by a third was to say, well, fuck you, and this is gold, and how dare you. I didn't say that, but that's what I felt. And I did think it would be perfectly in line with Black Crowes thinking to put out a 900-page book out of the, you know, like multi-volume. Release the box set first, do it. And then one of the guys at the publishing company said, hey, man, have you ever recommended a book that you didn't finish? And I went, yeah, that's a good measure. He goes, I don't care how good it is. People in the year 2019 don't read 900 pages of anything. And of course, in the 2 years since, that's been proven to be far more true. I mean, hell, there's streaming services now that are offering 60-second films. Yes. It's like the idea of people reading, at least for a first, you could say you like the Black Crowes, but a first-time writer, the whole idea of another book about another band, I mean, yeah, it can be good and it can be unique, but 900 pages is fucking ridiculous to consider.
Well, had you thought in like a second edition, if another one ever came out like that, would you add a few extra maybe stories to it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we released the paperback and it's the same book, but down the road, I do think there's a much expanded version, almost like a coffee table book. Like I've my friends run Genesis Publishing and they do those great rock coffee table books. Yeah. Cool. And I've thought about going to them because we could put the entire, well, the thing is this, it's one thing to say, okay, we've cut it from 900 to 350 pages, but then within those pages, there's many rounds of editing to make sure every detail is right, every verb tense is right, every adjective is not used too often. The copy editor and I dug into this thing for months. Once Steven and I were like, okay, this is the basic book. But all that to say, if I were going to put out a 900-page version, that's got to happen again. But I would love to do a bigger version with a ton of photos and a ton of more personal mementos. It would be a limited edition thing. I don't think that's a bestseller, but it's something that I know a lot of fans would really dig.
We will all buy that, probably.
100%.
Well, yes, that's three. That's a start.
The other three guys in our text chain will probably buy it too.
If you're promising me 6 copies sold, this is nudging me closer to the starting line.
Being a big Black Crowes fan, I was someone who got into the band late. I'm only 37, so I didn't get into you guys really till Three Snakes came out.
I can't believe we're even having this conversation. I thought you were OG, man.
When I finally really dived deep into the band, Johnny Colt was gone from the band, and I think for me one of the biggest highlights of the book was to get a sense of how important Johnny was to the band, at least to you, because based on the behind the music from 99 and from just being on the message boards when people were trashing him for being in the band Train and all that kind of stuff, and Skinner, I got a sense that he was kind of like this throwaway bass player. But then to read all your stories, it was great. And did you really feel in the book that it was your job to really show his importance and his worth to the band and to give him the respect that you felt he deserved?
I don't think I felt like it was my job. It's just reality. And similarly for Ed and for Mark, like the things those guys brought to the band. I mean, for people that, the Black Crowes in the 90s up until 97 were a very different thing than they ever were again. Everything we did in those years is what gave everybody a 20-year run since. I mean, clearly. For people that want to nitpick or talk about, well, it could have been anybody there, or it wasn't necessarily because of the bass player, that's not the point. The Chicago Bulls didn't win shit till Scottie Pippen showed up, and then they didn't win shit till Phil Jackson showed up, and then, when Paxson was getting old, they had to go get Steve Kerr. It's like chemistry is everything. The chemistry of that band from 91, even before Mark joined, the band turned into a really good rock and roll band in 1991. Now, Mark was a giant upgrade across the board. We had already done our job, and so we were ready for someone like him. He came in, and there's no greater cherry on top of a well-baked cake in the history of music. That guy just elevated everything. But in large part, that had already happened because of what Ed brought to the table. But the rest of us, me, Johnny, and the brothers who were there from the start, we worked our ass off too. Like, it was just all of the elements matter. Yeah. You can sit there and talk about what might have been, but why? Because what actually was is the story to me. Johnny being a throwaway bass player I understand how people thought that. I would hope that people don't. I'm glad that the book has, at least opened your eyes to that not being the case. And there are people that would still tell you he was, and they're wrong. have no idea what they're talking about. 2 of those people are still in the Black Crowes, and they're wrong. The fact is they're wrong about everything. I read on Twitter the other day that in the Shake Your Moneymaker box set, it says that I was a drummer from Kentucky. Like, that's how they describe me. Like, just this guy, it's like, okay, fine, whatever. You want to rewrite history. I don't have time in a day to think about how completely sad that is for someone that thinks that's an appropriate representation of what I was for the Black Crowes. It's the same thing with Johnny. It's the same thing with Mark. It's the same thing with Ed. And for that matter, Luther was great in the band. Adam did a fucking wonderful job. Sven's an amazing bassist. It's not a knock against the guys that came later. But the fact of the matter is, that incarnation of the band from Southern Harmony through the album we called Band that we recorded in 97, there's just a chemistry and a magic to that involves everybody. It's 6 guys at a time in all of their lives and an age and with a level of experience and still hungry and still curious and still all of these things that one day those things aren't there anymore. They haven't been there for a long time. Doesn't mean you can't still be a really good group. You can't put on great shows. But to me, the greatest bands are about chemistry. George Martin always said, I didn't sign the Beatles because they were good. I signed them because they were exceptional people. And he said, when those 4 guys walked into a room, the electricity in the air changed. And I recognized that. That's what I signed. In those years in the 90s, the 6 members of the Black Crowes changed the dynamic of rooms we entered. There's no getting around it. And so that's what was really so special to me. Having gone through my own walk through fire or whatever to get myself at a place where I felt healthy, Johnny's situation was shorter lived and far more intense. You know what I mean? He had the deluxe package in way less time. There, but for the grace of God go I that I didn't develop a drug addiction or some alcoholism along the way. But he did, and then he figured it out and then got past it and moved on. And in what now looks like a very short amount of time. He bottomed out, pulled himself out while still in the band. I mean, that's an incredible thing to accomplish. At the Black Crowes at that time, I still look back in absolute awe that he was able to do all that he did and did it so successfully. And he's 24 years removed, and he's had the best 24 years out of any of us, I promise you.
You touched on earlier the Jimmy Page era, which that passage, I think in the book is my favorite whole passage, just because I saw your show at Jones Beach in New York. I know there wasn't many shows.
That was a good one. That was.
But it was incredible.
That was the last show before we took a break and my son was born. I remember it very well. My wife was 900 months pregnant backstage that night.
That's so funny. And when people ask me, like, what are the favorite shows you ever saw? That's right up there.
Yeah.
I mean, I tell people that was as close to seeing Zeppelin in my mind as possible. You guys were just fire.
Oh,
and then
cool.
even Live at the Greek, the Live at the Greek album is one of my favorite drumming albums ever.
Great album.
I love the sound of your kit on that album, especially your snare. But I just want to ask you, what was your mindset when you knew you were going to do this with Jimmy Page, tackling the John Bonham catalog?
Well, I was really excited. I've ripped off Bonham as much as you can, like anybody has. I mean, I think not necessarily with the specific chops, but just the vibe. Ringo's always been my guy. Like Ringo plays the way Ringo's tracks feel like what drums are supposed to feel like to me. I didn't dig into Zeppelin until I was 21 in Atlanta, just bought my first drum kit, and the first time I ever put on Led Zeppelin 1 with headphones, I was already in a band.
Okay.
Now, I'd heard Zeppelin my whole life, but I'd never owned a Zeppelin album. Well, I did. I had Led Zeppelin 4 from a Columbia record and tape club misfire to my dorm room. But other than that, I put on Led Zeppelin 1, and I just listened all the way through, and it was like, I'm the 9 billionth guy to go, oh my God, I've seen the light. And this is 1987. Yeah. Oh my God, that's the other guy. Like I have Ringo and now I have this guy. And so right away from playing, I wasn't trying to emulate Ringo or Bonham. with what I played, but my mindset was always those two guys. Just swing it, man. Just make it feel good, and everybody else can do whatever the fuck they want. If it feels good, it works. And along the way, of course, Charlie Watts and Stones records, you break down the guitar tones on Exile on Main Street and the bass tones and the drum sounds. You're like, this sounds terrible. It doesn't matter. It feels great. That's the whole point. All this to say, Zeppelin records to this day just make me feel right. That's just what things are supposed to be. So when we knew that was going to happen, it was originally a one-off. That was just exciting. And it was like, but then Jimmy said, I want to do On My Time of Dying. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
And I remember being on a flight somewhere, and we were all there, and I put that on with headphones, like, okay, just got to make sense of this. I found it much easier to listen to bootlegs than the studio versions, because the studio versions are like sacrosanct.
Yes.
They're untouchable because you've heard them so many times. For the first time ever, I started really listening to bootlegs, and I was like, oh, they're not trying to recreate the records. I mean, I knew that, but I really was like, that made it easier to figure out I could recognize the arrangements much simpler. And then it just, Bonham never repeated himself. And so that took this huge pressure off me. I'm like, oh, every night's different for him. Yeah. Fuck, it's going to be different for me. This is great. And I was just doing this as a member of my own band. Jimmy joined the Black Crowes. That's how that worked. And I've said this a bunch, and it's totally true. If Jimmy and Robert and John Paul Jones call me and say, let's go be Led Zeppelin, see, that's a whole different conversation. That's like, oh, fuck. This was the Black Crowes, which I was already the drummer of. And we're going to learn Zeppelin songs, play them in a way that we're comfortable playing them. We want them to feel good the way the Black Crowes play, because it was just, we're a great band. I have a great bassist. I got a good singer. A great singer, great front man. And I got Audley and Rich as complimentary guitarists to Jimmy. This is going to be a fucking breeze. And Eddie's going to play, It was just easy in that regard.
Yeah.
I spoke to Jason Bonham a few weeks ago for my radio show. We've met once. We've never talked. And I was like, he did that show in 2007, the Led Zeppelin show. Yeah. And my wife and I were there. Jimmy invited us. And we were awesome guests of his. And it was great. It was funny because right before we took our seats, we're in the O2 Arena in the concourse, and I'm standing there with Dave Grohl and Chad Smith, and the first thing I said was, this is supposed to be my gig, right? and Chad said, no, my gig. Yeah. And Dave goes, fuck you both, my gig, and we're all laughing about it. And then we go take our seats, and then the show happens, and then after the set, we're backstage in the bar, and we're talking about it, and we're all going, man, that was a lot of pressure. Like when the lights went down, my first thought was, I was surprised. I was like, oh, come on, man. Come on, man. Don't shit your pants. Come on. Like, because on top of everything else, it's the fucking guy's dad.
Yeah.
I was really like, this is your, and Jason said to me the other day, we were just talking about all this stuff. And he said, the thing that still eats him alive, he goes, my favorite drummer was Stuart Copeland. I never told my dad I thought he was good, And I said, dude, that's everyone else's job. You just called him dad. Yeah. Like, I said, if my kids felt it was necessary to tell me I was a good drummer, I think I would have done something wrong. Like, there's only two people that called John Bonham dad, and he did his job if it never occurred to you to let him know you thought he was a good drummer. That's how I looked at it.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was supposed to see when you guys were supposed to open for The Who later in that tour.
Oh, at the Garden?
At the Garden. And when I heard the news, I was like...
Those would have been insane.
I was like devastated.
Yeah, when the whole thing was getting put together, and then they're like, then we're going to do 2 nights at the Garden. We'll be on the same night. 90 minutes with you guys, 90 minutes with The Who right away. I was like... And I lived in Brooklyn then, and I said, like, oh, I'm taking the train to those gigs. I'm taking the fucking 2-3 line from Flatbush, and by God, I'm going to take the subway to go play Madison Square Garden. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, and The Who were still really killer back then. I feel like that tour, they kicked ass, that tour, so.
Yeah. Yeah, Zach is like, I saw the Quadrophenia tour a few years ago, and I was just like, dude, like, seriously, What is with how does that even happen? Like your dad is Ringo Starr, and then you have the Moon thing down.
Well,
unbelievable.
Didn't Moon and Bonham teach him or something like that? Weren't they his drum teachers? I think.
Yeah, and it was funny talking to Jason because he tells he's telling stories about Ringo and Moon and Dad.
Yeah.
It's just like I was like, yeah, my dad was a worked for Brunswick Bowling, and your dad was John Bonham. Okay, cool. Yeah, right on.
And you did eventually get to play MSG. I did see that New Year's Eve show, and that was
oh yeah,
it was a good show. I know in the book you thought less of it.
I think in the grand scheme of things, it was an overshoot.
And I was actually going to ask about that whole 2005 tour was. I saw so many shows on that, and then got to see the New Year's Eve show. I mean, my favorite show I was talking to both these guys about, I was listening to today just to rev myself up, was a show outside in Philly. I think it was at the Tower Theater. Yeah. And you guys crushed. Like, it was an amazing show.
I remember playing the Pink Floyd song Fearless. I think that was the first time we ever played it. Dude, I remember that particular moment so clearly. I mean, honest to God, I have goosebumps because I was so happy we were playing that song. And when it kicked in, I remember the audience being like, no fucking way. Yeah. Everybody, I want to say it was the end of the first set, the last song of the first set.
It was.
It just brought, we played the Tower a bunch, but that moment I remember so clearly being like, man, this is magical right now. I love that. Yeah, that was great.
Yeah. But it was interesting because, seeing all those 05 shows and then the New Year's Eve show, which kind of, reading the book kind of was, a mess and the things were falling apart backstage. And then that whole 2006 tour, that summer tour that kind of, again, was a huge overshoot. Like, where they were giving free tickets away. Were things in the band just like a total mess at the time, or what was kind of happening?
Well, it was a mess, and it was really sad.
Yeah.
Ed was he had just crossed this line that junkies cross, where it's just like, oh wow, he's a real mess. Ed had a situation in New York City where he got like beat up. I don't think anybody really knows that story, but there was a really dark moments for Ed that summer, and it was very clear he was just. We had seen Ed come and go in bad shape and get his shit together before, but it's like, again, there's just a certain point where all of a sudden it's like, wait, he's not going to come back from this. And you can talk to him all you want, but you're just talking to a wall. It's over. And so it was that was terrible. It was really sad. Mark was also struggling with his sobriety all of a sudden, and that was terrible and sad. I remember just being really happy that Sven kept his shit together because I was so worried about Sven at that time. When that tour ended, that year was laid out in advance. We were going to play all through the fall. The whole point was to go out and just continue to play. And then the idea was always 2007 we'll make a record. But I think that by the end of that summer run, I mean, looking back, it's real clear to see, not unlike 1997, we just ran ourselves into the ground. It took us 7 years the first time. Well, as much older people, it only took a year and a half the second time. You know what I mean? It's like we ran ourselves into dust. And of course, it's obvious this thing to do would have been to pull the plug, everyone go home. Let's see if we can't get everybody the help they need, and let's keep this band together. But that was just not a possibility. I mean, I'm not pointing fingers and kicking dirt in people's faces. The Robinson brothers would have never in a billion fucking years done that. It's just that simple. And so it was a real, all of the promise of 2005 and all of the feelings of we're going to do it right this time, by the time the summer of 2006 rolled around, that was just done. And it sucked.
Like you said, it is sad, looking back, because that band was rip-roaring in 2005. Like, you guys were sounded so great.
Well, and the band was rip-roaring in 95. It was really good in 96. And as much as, and I know people love the band in 97, And I don't disagree that we were a really good band, but it had just become too hard again. Like we were killing ourselves. I mean, that's why I don't look back on that era fondly. Like, it's not my job to tell you when we were a great band. I can just tell you when it sucked to be there. You know what I mean? Like, fans who love, I always say fans are right. They prefer a certain time. Good, cool, great. I'm glad you like anything. The experience on the inside is very different. And in 1997 and in 2006, you know, we fucked ourselves in 1997 by not going, we just have to do whatever it takes to keep this band together. And then 9 years later, we did it again, you know? And it's kind of like, you know, the rock and roll gods don't forgive that shit. You take chemistry and you shit on it, you will pay the price. And no one's paying that price more than the two guys out calling themselves the Black Crowes in the year 2021.
Yeah.
I mean, the book to me, it's a sad book and it's a grateful book, you know? There's a lot of sadness and there's always going to be within the story of the Black Crowes, and there's a lot of great moments and a lot of really wonderful opportunities, you know what I mean? I mean, the band gave me I didn't have a passport until 1990. All of a sudden I had to go get a passport. Like, holy shit, we're going to England. And we're going to the Netherlands. Like, are you fucking kidding me? You know, my kids have been all over Europe. It was great. It's a sad story in the context of what could have been. But at the end of the day, that's just for us. For the people who love the band and love the music, it's fucking fantastic.
Crowes are top 5 band in my life. And
that's great. I mean,
yeah,
that's
same
awesome,
here.
Man. I've spent a little bit of time over the years with Mike Mills, and I'm like, we get along fine. But when he leaves the room, I'm like, that guy's the reason I play music. I saw REM. I saw REM before Murmur was released, and it changed my life. You know, like literally. Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, I always knew I was going to be a drummer, and I knew I was going to be in a band. But suddenly, I knew I was going to be in a band. Like REM meant the absolute. I mean, that was the conduit. That's when everything that was just in my head plugged into the wall and went, okay, motherfucker, you're doing this. You know,
At the end of every episode, the three of us talk about music that we have been listening to, you know, some new artists or just in general music that maybe is older that we've, you know, been reconnecting with or just discovered. Who are some bands or artists that you've been, you know, listening to that, you know, you want to, you know, give a shout out to, or just, you know, what you've been listening to lately?
I'm just going to throw out, here's a nepotism alert, a band called Illiterate Light. My nephew is the singer, the guitarist. And I only say this because they're fucking great and real. Illiterate Light is good for whatever ails you. And I'm pretty good at not letting my personal feelings impact my taste, which is my way of saying I've heard a lot of music from a lot of people I love that I was like, okay, I'm glad you're happy. I would never mention that to another soul. That's not the case with Illiterate Light. I fucking love the band.
Awesome.
My nephew, Jeff Gorman, plays guitar and sings. His drummer, Jake Cochran, is one of my favorite drummers. They're both wonderful human beings, and I truly love that band. And I can tell you this quite sincerely. I would say that if I'd never known them on any level, because when they found themselves and finally put it together, the first time I saw them, it was like, it was not unlike, I mean, it made me want to go start a band. Wow. I just went, oh my God. It was like someone handed me the sword from Excalibur again. Like, that's what they make me feel like.
And now with the, hopefully with the pandemic ending soon and things opening back up, what are some things that you have coming up or lined up for the year? I'm guessing Trigger Hippie might.
Yeah, no, for sure. Trigger Hippie is going to play. We're going to play a show in Nashville. We'll announce it pretty soon in May. We're playing in Chattanooga in June.
Well,
and then hopefully in the fall, a few more things. We're definitely have a bunch of stuff cooking for 22. There's a lot, all the offers are coming in now. We're trying to put it together.
Sweet. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Steve, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast.
No worries, man. Thank you guys very much.
All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Steve Gorman.
Thanks for listening to this episode, and a huge thanks to Steve Gorman for coming on our show and talking with us. It was truly an honor for us to have that conversation with him, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to it as much as we enjoyed having it. You can follow Steve on Twitter at SGSFox, on Instagram at Steve_Gorman. You can also check to see if his syndicated radio show, Steve Gorman Rocks, is in your area by going to stevegormanrocks.com. While there, you can find clips of his interviews with some legends of rock music. If you want to check out his band Trigger Hippie, which we definitely suggest doing, you can find them all on streaming platforms or go to triggerhippie.com. Finally, if you haven't already, do yourself a favor and go read or listen to his book, Hard to Handle, The Life and Death of the Black Crowes. It was a great read and was incredibly enlightening to what went on during Steve's long tenure with the band.
If you haven't already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the podcast and tell your fellow music-loving dads or moms or anyone to check it out. And if this is your first time listening to the show, we hope you'll check out our previous episodes. And whether this is your first time or you've been listening to the show for the past year, and you like or even love what you've heard, we'd love for you to rate and review the podcast. Not only will it be informative to us, but it does really help promote the show. We can be found on Instagram and Twitter at DadRocksPod, as well as on Facebook by searching up Dad Rocks! If you have any questions, comments, or any show ideas for us, or just want to give us a shout, you can email us at dadrockspod@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening today. Thanks again for listening this whole past year. We really appreciate you all listening to our show. And remember, dads, you rock.